The genre of heavy metal in the early years of the 21st century is well established and is clearly identifiable by sound alone, and many of the key musical fingerprints that identify heavy metal were founded by Black Sabbath during the late 1960s. Significantly, Black Sabbath themselves seem to have been influenced by the post-war environment of Birmingham, UK. For many years, however, there has been much disagreement and confusion amongst scholars as to the precise definition of heavy metal music, with many researchers focusing on sociological and cultural aspects, whilst giving the actual musical sounds very little attention. With this in mind, my research sought to highlight the originality of Black Sabbath by direct comparison to the work of Led Zeppelin, as both started life as blues bands but took very different directions musically. I assume that many people who listen to this will have little or no knowledge of music theory. Therefore, in order to fully appreciate the points I am about to make, I will explain very briefly some fundamental concepts that form the background to this discussion. Harmony in music occurs where two or more sounds are combined. In Western music traditions, harmony is based on a system called tonality, where three-note chords called triads are formed from notes of the major scale. Here's the sound of the major scale, which is very familiar. Tonal chords are formed from the first, third and fifth notes of the major scale, and importantly these triads can be major or minor depending on the pitch of the third or middle note of the chord. Here's a major chord, here's a minor chord, and it is the third note that is lower in pitch. There's the third note in the major chord, there's the third note in the minor chord that makes the difference. So it is the middle note that gives the chord its tonality. In systems derived from tonality, such as blues, specific four-note chords become significant. These are known as dominant seventh chords and are a very familiar sound in blues. Here's one, and another, and another, and back to the first one. The emerging rock music of the mid to late 1960s was rooted in the tonal and blues systems just described, where blues scales and tonal harmony are merged to form blues rock. This is evident in much of Led Zeppelin's rock output. For example, in Communication Breakdown, the verse utilises open major chords played with typical aggression and overdriven amplifiers. The chorus uses a device called a 12-bar riff that is used extensively in blues and rock and roll, and its use in Communication Breakdown stays within tonal parameters. In Living Loving Maid, a melodic riff is combined with a stock-in-trade sequence of dominant seventh chords. Here's the riff. Here are the dominant seventh chords. Such methods formed the core of Led Zeppelin's rock output. However, Black Sabbath, in particular Tony Iommi, developed a new way of writing that boldly ignored the established conventions of tonality and instead utilised chords with no third. Chords without a middle note or a third are considered, according to the rules and theories of tonality, as undesirable and to be avoided because of their bare and stark sound. Such chords have come into common use in rock and metal and are known as fifth or power chords. Their effect is redolent of music from the medieval period, where sequences of fifths were common and part of the musical compositional style of that era. So music based on fifths is clearly archaic and has an identity all of its own. is an example. The reason Iommi developed this style of playing and composing was in part due to him losing the ends of his right and middle fingers in an industrial accident. The story is well documented and does not need to be repeated here, but being a left-handed player, the accident meant that in order to continue playing, he would have to change his playing technique and style. One way in which he did this was by creating guitar riffs that were based on two-note chords, fifth chords, and he played them with amplifiers turned up full to give them sufficient body and texture. Thus Iommi created his own unique playing style using only the index and little finger of his fretting hand, the index finger on the 6th string and the little finger on the adjacent 5th string, 2 frets apart, which forms the aforementioned 5th chord, and this shape can be moved to any point along the length of the guitar neck. In fact, this approach fitted perfectly with the change of musical style and image the band underwent during 1969 as they became Black Sabbath. The emerging new style was dark and progressive with themes akin to the supernatural, hammer horror films and anti-war protest. It carried with it connotations of the medieval period and exploited the dark nuances inherent in this musical interval. It also represented a transgression of the tonal system. The sequences of fifth chords that Iommi used in many of Sabbath's first songs, therefore, was a unique way of writing, and combined with other important and unique elements, which are discussed in my other audio presentations related to this topic, to become one of the musical hallmarks of heavy metal. This type of chord has subsequently come to be known, as mentioned above, the power chord. This style of writing was not used by other bands until after Black Sabbath had released their first recordings. Iron Man provides a good example of the way in which Iommi developed this style of writing and playing. The power chord shape is formed at fret 7 on the guitar, and then the same chord shape is moved at specific points on the fretboard between fret 7 and fret 15 to create the riff. In War Pigs, the same technique is clearly evident. My discussion of Black Sabbath's unique contribution to the emergence of heavy metal continues on the second audio presentation, where I discuss the way in which they combine specific musical intervals with themes of the supernatural, hammer horror and anti-war.